Hey, welcome to the Frank Figliuzzi Show. I can't think of a better guest or a better time for this guest than today. So thanks for joining us. We have with us today Senator Mark Warner. You know him as the Vice Chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee. He's been in the Senate since 2009, formerly governor of Virginia. We've got stuff to talk about. Senator Warner, thanks for joining us.
Frank, thank you for having me. And yeah, we won't lack for subjects.
No, we'll run out of time before we run out of subjects. Why not start with the topic of the day, which is the so-called deal with Iran? Have you received any particular briefing on this, or are you like us watching TV and seeing what happens?
I'm watching TV, no brief. Now, if the president wants to declare victory, that may be, frankly, for our country and the world, the best thing. But I don't think this agreement will stand up to the test of time. You know, remember the president went in without asking the Congress, without asking the American people. You know, he had noble goals. You know, let's get a better regime, get rid of the Iranian nuclear capabilities, get rid of the missiles, sink their navy. We've not done any of that. The regime now is worse because of more extreme. You know, this pathway to getting rid of their nuclear enriched uranium. I think the Iranians have been masters at manipulating this for years, and I think they can out-negotiate our negotiators who don't even have background. Clearly, they still have their missile capability. And while the strait may be reopened, the whole idea that at any point Iran, because of they've got literally 500 or 600 of these little speedboats that can mine the strait or mine tankers at any time, I don't see how anyone, even in Trumplandia, can say America and our allies are better off after this 107-day war of choice.
Yeah, so we are of one mind on that. A phrase comes to mind that I've used often in my FBI career. Our situation has not improved. I don't think, that opening the strait, which was open before the war.
Yes, sir.
Having a hardline regime, which we had before the war, having them preserve status quo with their nukes, allegedly, and promise not to move forward with a nuclear program, is any better than we had. And yeah, I think Americans are going to see through this.
And Frank, you brought one last thing, though.
Yeah.
It has already taken roughly $60 billion out of American pockets on increased gas prices. That doesn't count the increased airline prices, the fertilizer prices.
Right.
And my kind of one of the wild things that energy expert says, because we have depleted all of our worldwide reserves so far down, at some point, the reality of that, even though the strait may reopen, I don't know whether basic supply and demand, maybe not in our country, but around the world, is not going to hit a tipping point in July.
That's what they're saying, end of July, early August. And that's where I thought Iran's leverage point would be optimal. So we'll see if they really sign off on this. The return on investment's not there. What are you hearing about releasing frozen Iranian assets back to them?
I think that will be the great irony, because remember, Obama got lambasted under the JCPOA, where we actually did have eyes on the Iranian assets, and we had Russia and China part of our alliance. I cannot imagine any path forward where Iran doesn't get some resources released. Now, how the president will explain that, I don't know. And he will say this is Iranian caught resources, the same thing that Obama used. But there will be resources going to the regime. And, on top of that, remember, during this war, the Trump Treasury Department actually released the sanctions on Iranian oil that was at sea. So we've already been shoveling them about $14 billion. And then on top of that, because of our relief on the Russian oil, I still am a little old school. I still think we should support the Ukrainians. Putin's gotten another 12 to 15 billion, depending on how you cut it. So I don't know how Iran will not come out with additional cash that they would not have had prior to the beginning of this war in late February.
My guest last week was Jim Himes, and I'm sure you work along with Jim, and he used the phrase, Iran is in the strategic catbird seat. they can make Trump look even worse than he already does with anything they do at this point.
Yes, sir. And, and it also, we've had this tenuous agreement with our Gulf allies. Now there are questions whether we're going to stay. I get so frustrated. One thing I do agree with Donald Trump on, which is rare, but my frustration with Bibi Netanyahu and the Israeli government. I am, very supportive of Israel's right to defend itself, but the continuing bombing of southern Lebanon, I do not know how this will play out. And the fact that this is still held so close, at some point, these facts are going to come out. The American people are going to know, we in Congress and the rest of the world are going to know. And even in Trumpian world, as up is down and down is up, how you explain this as a win, I think even the master manipulator, Mr. Trump, will have a hard time making that case.
Yeah, you went there. I was going to go there next, and that is Israel and Netanyahu. And like you, yes, of course, I support Israel's right to exist and to defend itself, but not necessarily to dictate our foreign policy and future. And so the latest I heard this morning, and again, we're both going off news reports, is Israel may not play on this deal. They may go off on their own. And I think Trump's objectives and Netanyahu's have clearly diverged. It's in Netanyahu's best interest to keep going, and it's in, for face-saving purposes, it's in Trump's best interest to stop.
And as you know, Frank, Netanyahu has his own political history catching up with him. He's under, indictment by the Israeli justice system. His only path is to try to maintain the far right coalition he has. And, I don't think this is going to end well. And, I've constantly been disappointed by the Lebanese government inability to disarm Hezbollah. But on the other hand, simply bombing to smithereens all of southern Lebanon takes people, the Christian communities, the Druze communities, even some of the other Sunni communities that might be ready to be done with the Shia Hezbollah, but it takes them off the board because of Israel's overly aggressive activity. So, in
that vein, and with your role on Senate intelligence, where do you fall on this idea that this had to happen because Iran was weeks away from being able to build a nuclear weapon? Where do you come down on that?
Categorically false.
Yeah.
Absolutely false. There was no imminent threat. Yeah. Even the person who was then director of national intelligence, who's resigning, Tulsi Gabbard, who I have huge issues with, acknowledged that there was no imminent threat. Yeah. There was both as you know, Frank, this was your business, there's the enrichment part, but then there's also the delivery mechanism and a host of other things we can't talk about here.
Right.
And again, let me make clear, the Iranian regime has been, and will be awful to the region, awful to their people. Yeah. Ironically, if in early January, when the Iranian people literally were rising up, and I think north of 30,000 were killed, I'm still not sure that would have been the time, but at least if he tried to intervene then, it might have tipped the regime. He couldn't, because the forces we were supposed to have in the region at that point, the USS Ford, which was deployed from my state in Norfolk, and the carrier group was off the coast of Venezuela on his other expedition against Maduro. So, and then the idea that if we're at this point now, in a normal course, if we're going to say we're going to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, the way to do this would be to say we're going to have an international armada of our European friends, others, but none of our traditional friends want to get on board because of his efforts towards Greenland and his, kind of zigging and zagging all over the place. Exactly. And again, at the end of the day, we are stronger with allies and friends. The Russians, Chinese, Iranians don't have those. We have them, but we have burnt so many of them. It's just...
Yeah, for sure. My whole FBI career has been, a story of succeeding with friends and having friends who have your back. And that's very true in the intelligence world. And I'm very concerned about that loss of friendship. Yeah, neither one of us can go into detail, but with both of our backgrounds, it seemed we were doing pretty darn well with suppressing Iran's nuclear program. It seemed to me, certain Iranian scientists had very short shelf lives, and things were happening.
And we had, and JCPOA was not perfect, the Obama agreement, but we actually had Russia and China as part of the enforcers. We did have eyes on, and anyway, we are where we are.
Yeah.
And frankly, if the president, I'm not going to bemoan if the president wants to declare victory. No. It's not a victory, but it at least maybe is a way for us to extract, because continuation of this non-thought through policy would be also a mistake. Well, let me just raise one quick thing that just makes me crazy. For years, as we followed the Ukraine-Russia war, we keep asking our military, are we learning the lessons from the Ukrainians? They've figured out how to use drones much more effectively than us. So we've been, since this war started, we're using missiles cost $2.5 million to shoot down Iranian drones. Mm-hmm. The Ukrainians offered us all their technology. Yep. Ukrainian can figure out a way to take a $5,000 drone and take down an Iranian drone. We turned it down. If somebody in the White House said, we may be going to war with Iran, why wouldn't we take that technology? We have not learned any of that. And frankly, we have used up so many of our munitions in the region that we are allies, and increasingly even Israel is now vulnerable.
Yeah. America first has become America alone. We don't want or need anybody's help, and it's hurting us. We could do a whole hour on Ukraine and the lack of appropriate support for Ukraine. But let's segue into a logical next topic, which is the DNI position. The mortgage guy, who may be the acting head of 18, 19 intelligence agencies. And let's talk, while we're at it, let's talk about the new nominee, Jay Clayton. So we've got tell me if I'm wrong, we've got a scheduled hearing for Clayton coming up. Is it this week?
Yeah, we've got a hearing on Wednesday. And, I've known Jay Clayton for some time. If I was choosing, he might not been my choice, but I think he's an honorable individual. I think he understands the rule of law. He's had experience as the Securities and Exchange Commissioner chairman. As you know, the Southern District of New York is one of our where he's been U.S. attorney, has been one of the most important roles. But I've still got questions for him. There's some red lines. Don't punt around on who won the election in 2020. Tell the truth. Yeah. And then what I particularly want is him to answer straightforwardly about how we're not going to abuse this position the way Tulsi Gabbard did on domestic interference in our elections. Remember, Ms. Gabbard showed up at that infamous raid of the FBI down in Fulton County, Georgia. So he has to assure me and others that we are going to preserve the integrity of our elections. And the ironic thing here, and I don't want to go down this rabbit hole because I could nerd out forever, but many of the protections of our elections were set up during Trump 1 after the Russian intervention. And, CISA, our cybersecurity agency, worked very well with state voting rolls. Yes. The NSA did good things. The FBI did good things. And all of that has been systemically unwound under Director Gabbard. And what I need to hear from Jay Clayton is election security this year will be a priority. And his job should be focusing on foreign intervention, not trying to tip the scales here in America.
Amen to that. Because look, the guardrails that were put into place, as you said, literally in the first week of Pam Bondi's role as the new Attorney General, she dismantled, for example, the FBI-led Foreign Influence Task Force.
Yes, sir.
All under one roof, multiple agencies trying to fight back. And boy, do they, especially with NSA, they fight back online attempts to hack the propaganda that comes at us from foreign powers. And my concern with somebody like Clayton, certainly if Pulte gets in there, Bill Pulte, even for a minute, is that they're going to immediately try to attach this foreign threat. We've lost the agents and prosecutors who work the foreign threat. We've dialed away from it, from a SIGINT capability, allegedly. And so now we're easily duped by a DNI who wants to go, there's a foreign threat. to the election, and we've got to change the rules, and we got to do this different. And I don't know how you get that into his head that can't happen.
Well, Frank, you just explained it better than I've been trying to do this on a repeated basis, because the DNI can take a piece of either false intelligence or, as you know, a single source piece that is not validated and use that as an excuse. Yeah. So one of the things I've been doing have been trying to talk to folks like you and others from the intelligence community, from law enforcement, from the military. I think our military is still one of our best last lines of respecting the Constitution, and also seeing as some of my Republican friends, maybe who are former, that will just say if something smells fishy coming out of the DNI, take a pause and take a moment. Mm-hmm. And the fear I have, Frank, is, and I've lots of business leaders, they all say individually, but they're so afraid of retribution. At some point, an extra, couple dollars on your stock portfolio, if we take away the integrity of our elections, I just hope and pray that, I don't want to sound naive, but that people will stand up. I know I have great faith, frankly, in a lot of your former colleagues. I have a great faith in a lot of our former intelligence professionals, but we just don't know in this kind of world where everything hears their own news source.
Yes.
Whether there'll be enough, but I am terribly afraid. And the irony is, I'm more afraid. I think the foreign interference, Russia, China, etc., will still try, but I'm more almost afraid of people inside the administration trying to manipulate this, and then be, accelerated by the foreign activities.
Yeah, bingo. One of the reasons we've been trying to schedule you for a while, and I started because you got my attention. You got a lot of people's attention when you came out and said, "Look, there's a draft circulating on how to interfere with the elections." Tell us more about what you know about that.
Well, that draft, I have not seen the draft. It was reported by the Post, but it was going to cite China's interference in 2020. China has the capabilities, enormous capabilities. We have not seen them dial them up fully. But there was that draft, and one of the things that is just crazy on this stuff, almost everything that comes out of this administration somehow on this election issue dials back to malfeasance that they claim in the 2020 election. Because at the end of the day, Donald Trump can't abide people saying he lost. One of my threshold question for Jay Clayton is going to be, who won the 2020 election? I pray that he answers truthfully. So I am quite worried. And I do fear, the idea of troop intervention, the idea of ICE, which is more frightening than troops, yes. The idea of trying to scare people away from the polls.
Yes.
These are all very real criteria or very real threats. And my fear, Frank, again, is if we have a corrupted election, how do we ever go back to a normalcy?
Yeah, the genie's out of the bottle. Yeah. At that point, so the writing's on the wall. I'm writing a column this week. I write a column every week for Lincoln Square Media, and my column this week is dedicated to the increasing warning signs that we are talking about a mess for the midterms, and specifically your colleagues, your Senate colleagues over at Armed Services. Just tell me if I'm wrong on this, but they shot down an attempt to bolster and strengthen the rules around not having federal troops at polling places, and that failed.
Yes, sir.
What's going on with that? What that to me, that should be like the lead story on the news. Right. Senate says we can have federal troops at polling places.
Yeah. Yes, I have no excuse on that, and that's where again I keep coming back. Then I disappoint with my Republican friends, and I know they love our country. I mean, but not standing up on national security. If they want to complain about this and back and forth on social policy, or Democrats went too far on PC or like, and listen, as a Democrat, I need to acknowledge Biden screwed up the border. Our exit from Afghanistan was awful. Let's acknowledge where mistakes were made. But that doesn't then give a green light for potential abuse that undermines the whole legitimacy of our whole system. And,
the military, the insertion of the military in this would give us like a whole of government Trump approach to messing with the election. We've already got Mark Wayne Mullen at DHS on the Sunday talk shows. He was interviewed by Casey Hunt over the weekend on CNN. He says he refuses to rule out ICE at the polls. He talks about, we're designed to flex to threats. So if there's a threat, like a bomb threat, and of course I'm screaming at my TV screen, no, ICE doesn't respond to bomb threats. What are you talking about?
Well, I actually, if we go way back to, a year ago September when Hegseth and Trump brought all the uniformed military into the meeting at Quantico, I actually took great solace from that because it appeared, I think they expected this rah-rah, and I think our uniformed military, responded professionally. What I fear, though, is there is an effort, and it's reported, and I know you hear about it as well, where they are systemically going through and trying to not promote people that don't adhere to the Trump agenda. People are getting moved out, disproportionately women and people of color. And then on top of that, the ICE, many of the people who have been hired in this 10,000 person plus up on ICE are people that couldn't get into the military, couldn't get into law enforcement. This will get me in trouble. The career ICE people who've been doing this for 15 years, I have some sympathy for them. They're not looking to be in the middle of all this.
No, I have friends who are senior executives at ICE, and they're besides themselves right now. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
But again, we just, there is we all know the challenges. We do have to hang in. We all have to fight back in whatever way we can. And part of this, though, is I appeal all the time, talk to our friends and family who supported the president and just say, is this really, he said he was going to get us out of war, so he was going to lower prices. Is this really what you're looking for? The idea, I was, in 1976, I was a young kid on the mall for the 200th anniversary of the bicentennial, and a great party, the parts that I can remember. But, now with the 250th, the fact that we're approaching this major anniversary in our country, and it has been totally politicized by the president.
Right.
It's just wrong. It's just wrong.
It's sad that people don't even feel like they can display the American flag now anymore because they feel like it's owned by MAGA, and it's not. And I tell people it's not. It's our flag. It's
also something where I think one of the things the Democrats or not just Democrats, independents, Republicans, I give a lot of credit to the folks who are that I have a lot of empathy for my Republican friends because I know how much personal threats and oftentimes what happens with Republicans who go against the president, it's not only they're threatened, but their family disproportionately their daughters.
Right.
But I do think there is, and again, this sounds wonky, but I do think the amount of graft that's going on may be the tipping point. If we can make the case, again, this is not just about self-enrichment, but these are your dollars. And the analogy to Viktor Orban in Hungary, where he was Trump plus in terms of owning all the media, but the Hungarian people finally pushed back. So making the case about the graft issue, because I do worry at times some of the other things becomes a little bit of noise, I think is why there was the pushback on the ball.
No, and throughout history, authoritarians have been toppled throughout history when the public realizes there's graft and corruption. In the remaining 5 minutes we've got, Senator, near and dear to my heart, I have personally appeared before the FISA court in my FBI career probably 30 times. I've signed out hundreds of FISA affidavits. Is FISA dead right now, and where are we?
One, FISA is terribly important. It expired on Friday night. What we do not know, and I don't have the answer to this, are the telephone companies and the Googles still sharing? There is authority that goes until March. But will they still participate because they lose the indemnification?
Right.
We don't know, number one. Number two, I will fight. And one of the things, and your old bureau, I think, did make some mistakes, but in the compliance rate was like 60%. The reforms post 2024 put in bipartisan have got the compliance rate at north of 98%. And remember, this is not how it's misconstrued, like some warrantless search of Americans.
Yeah, it drives me crazy. It's not.
There are two foreigners talking about Frank,
yeah,
two Russian spies, one's in Paris, one's in Moscow. They're talking about Frank, and we don't know whether Frank is a Russian spy or maybe a victim of an attack.
Right.
So, if we want to look at who else Frank talked to, we can look at that without a warrant. But if we want to look at the contents,
yes,
you got to get a warrant.
Yes.
So
exactly.
you couldn't get a warrant. You couldn't get a warrant if we just have Frank's phone number or name, because you don't know if he's a victim or a bad guy.
Yeah.
And we have dramatically increased additional reforms in terms of reporting. It has to be signed off now by the most senior, if it's a journalist, if it's a politician, if it's a religious figure. We added saying there's no way to use a 702 against people using their constitutional rights about protesting. Not perfect, but it's not a perfect world. And I pray we get this through. My fear is, Frank, just one last, is that Trump does not want this through. His administration didn't even come out with a position on this until 6 weeks ago. And now the idea, if he would have put forward Jay Clayton or anybody else a week ago, we could have avoided this. So I'm committed, as long as Clayton doesn't screw up, to try to get him in, to try to prevent Pulte. And my fear about Bill Pulte, who doesn't even have a security clearance, is not how he could do damage with 702, because there is an audit trail, as you talked about, with the FISA court and everything else.
Right.
The damage he could do by just disclosing classified information that he doesn't even know is classified.
For sure.
It's huge national security risk.
For sure. Well, we've hit a lot of topics, and yeah, it's my hope that a rush to confirm Clayton is going to somehow impact FISA, and I don't know where that's going. And I hope that Clayton isn't rushed, as you said, to the point where we lose the hard questions in the vetting process. The fact that he was the SAC chair, the fact that he is the U.S. attorney in SDNY doesn't mean he's got substantial intelligence experience, nor does it necessarily mean, because correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think he ever went through full confirmation as U.S. attorney in New York. I think the judge
did not, but he did go through full confirmation at the Securities and Exchange Commission. And as you know, because as we go into crypto and some of these other things, he has exposure there. And Southern District has a lot of national security.
Oh, absolutely.
Again, at the end of the day, my criteria for most of these folks at this point is, will they follow the Constitution? End of the day, they're not going to be my choices.
It's a low bar, Senator.
And we have done this. One quick aside, Tim Kaine and I picked the U.S. attorney candidates. Trump appointed two, one for the Eastern District, one for the Western District. Only thing we asked, and one had been the former Republican Speaker of the House. They had completely valid Republican bona fides. The only thing we said was, don't break the law and don't do anything immoral. They both got fired within weeks of their appointment because they got asked to do that bad stuff. So
here we are. Senator, you've been a pleasure. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you, Frank.
I know you're reaching out more and more to independent journalists and online and Substack, and that's where the future is. Thanks for doing it. Godspeed to you and your family, and we're keep up the good work. Take care. Bye. All right, that was Senator Mark Warner, Vice Chair of Senate Intelligence Committee. If we had more time with him, we would have also talked about, the governor role, right? He was governor of Virginia. And so I'm fascinated by what states are doing and what governors can do to push back, fight back, particularly when it comes to election fraud and messing with the election. And places like California and New York are trying to do what they can do. We've got a great show coming up on Wednesday. I've been promising you that we're going to get an AI and data center expert. What do we do? Where is there a middle in the debate over data centers and AI? No one wants it in their backyard. Experts are telling us we've got to do something. China's going to beat us at it. What's the story with water usage and power usage? And is there a way to regulate these in an appropriate way to keep us competitive with the rest of the world? We're going to get deep into that on Wednesday with an expert from the University of Illinois. And then check out my column, which should be out Wednesday, on what we just talked about, which is the Senate failed to block an increased rule against posting federal troops at polling stations over the weekend. Mark Wayne Mullen at DHS refused to rule out ICE at polling stations. All of that in my column this week. Thanks for joining us on the Frank Figliuzzi Show.